Welcome to our quick guide on how to analyze poetry for English 102. I'm Professor Castillo, and today we're going to break down some tools and tips that help us feel a little bit more confident when we're reading and writing about poetry, even if poetry isn't really your thing quite yet. All right, so here's a quick look at what we're going to be covering today, from basic definitions to specific techniques like punctuation and tone. We're going to be walking through how to approach a poem step by step. As you can see, we have a ton of steps. So don't worry, it's not about memorizing the terms. It's really about just learning to slow down and really listen to what a poem is doing. All right, so what is poetry? It's a concentrated use of language to express thought or emotion. That means every word, every pause, every line matters. Poetry can often play with sound or rhythm, and it tends to focus on really big themes like love, death, identity, grief, which is what we've been exploring in this unit. It can be really personal, political, or even philosophical. So for this lesson, we're going to be looking at Sylvia Plath's Death and Co. is our example. But really, these tips can apply to any poem that you come across. All right, so sorry about that. So my number one tip always is to read it twice. Read the poem twice. So the first time you're going to read it just to kind of get a feel of it and think about what stands out, what images stick. And then the second time is when you're going to start asking questions. And with Plath especially, read slowly. Her poetry has like a ton of emotional shifts and a lot of intensity, so make sure you take your time with it. Okay, don't skip the title because it's pretty significant, and honestly, a lot of poets will use their titles to kind of give us clues about what's coming. So in Death and Co., for example, the title frames a poem as if death is a business partner or a corporation. A little bit weird, right? But it does tell us about what we're about to explore with some heavy themes, maybe even some irony. All right, so don't freak out and stay calm. If the poem does feel a little bit unsettling or confusing, that's okay. That's often intentional. It's meant to kind of make us feel uncomfortable. And Plath's poetry specifically lives in these really weird gray areas where you don't really get it all at once, and that's okay. You have to let yourself sit with the images and just let them work on you over time. That's why it's important for us to read these types of poems multiple times. All right, and now the fun part. Read it out loud. It's really about sound. Poetry is not meant to be read, right? It's meant to be listened to out loud. And listen for choppy or smooth rhythms, repetition, or maybe some harsh sounds. In Death and Co., the hard consonants, black, drag, rubs, sound heavy, even violent. And really, if you think about it, that sound kind of shapes the tone of the overall poem. Most importantly, pay attention to the punctuation because poets are super intentional with punctuation. Are there dashes? Does a sentence run across line breaks? Plath really likes to use punctuation to control how we read and feel. Short lines, for example, and abrupt stops can create tension, so pay attention to that. All right, now poetry can be confusing, especially if you're new to it. So if a line does confuse you a little bit, try restating it in your own words, but don't flatten it. Keep that weirdness, especially when it comes to Plath. Ask yourself who's speaking and who are they speaking to? So in our example, the speaker contrasts two visions of death, and that contrast is really key. Okay. And who is the speaker? So don't assume that it's Plath herself. In Death and Co., the speaker kind of feels cold and detached, and that might just be a persona. Think about who the speaker is and maybe how they view the world, and that will ultimately shape how you interpret the poem. And next, be open to interpretation. Good poems don't always necessarily give clear answers. Sometimes it's pretty fuzzy, and that's, I think, how the poem wants to be interpreted as. So think about in Death and Co. What do the two men symbolize in her poem? Are they death and more death, love and death, masculinity or morality? Symbolism isn't necessarily always clean, and really that's part of the point of poetry. All right. And every word counts. Okay. In Platt's work, especially, even color choices like black shoe or objects like gloves and drag carry these really dark, oppressive tones. And her diction, her word choice really builds atmosphere. There is no one meaning, believe it or not. There is not one quote unquote right interpretation. Instead, just think about tone, tension, imagery, and context and ask yourself what resonates with you? What patterns or contradictions do you see? It's ultimately your interpretation. And as long as you can back it up with evidence, then it'll stand. All right. So to wrap it up, analyzing poetry is not necessarily about decoding some secret message. Really, it's about slowing down, paying attention, and using tools like careful reading, strong vocabulary, and awareness of the tone. Plath's poems often resist like resolution. It's never nice and neat whenever you read any of her work. And they really force us to kind of sit with this discomfort. And that's okay. Sometimes the point of a poem is not necessarily to give us this like clean ending and give us this closure. It's to give us something to think about. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and I will chat with you guys later. Bye.